A couple years ago, I had a podcast because I was a deconstructing, deconverting Christian, losing my faith, and I had all these hot takes on the Bible and Christianity and stuff, and I just had to get them out there. So I had a podcast where I was going through different passages of the Bible with a friend of mine who was a pastor. We did a handful of episodes. We're no longer doing it. Life is busy. What can I say? The format of the podcast was asking him questions about, my challenges, my objections to Christianity, that sort of thing. I had some questions that I was really intrigued by, but were cut for time or logistics or what have you. Cut to years later, I just found out about this AI, what would you call it, podcast generation system. Basically, you can just copy and paste a body of text or upload a document or something, and it will just automatically generate a podcast for you. So I thought I would take this write-up objection that was cut. So I just had a paragraph of text, copied it, pasted it into NotebookLM, and they created a podcast based on this argument that I came up with 2 years ago. So I'm just going to hit play and see what our AI friends think of my argument.
Okay, so get this, right? What if, and just hear me out on this, what if we took John Lennon's Imagine and we treated it like, I don't know, a sacred text, like up there with the Sermon on the Mount?
All right.
Wild, right?
Yeah.
But that's what we're diving into today. John Lennon versus Jesus, the ultimate wisdom battle. Who had the wiser words?
That's a good question. I mean, how do you even begin to compare the two? It's like comparing apples and, something completely different.
Right. And this excerpt we're looking at doesn't hold back. It jumps right in saying that Lennon's Imagine, while a pop song, has a message that's just as wise as some of Jesus's teachings.
Which really makes you think about the word wisdom, doesn't it?
Right.
What does it even mean for something to be wise?
Exactly.
Is it about timeless truths, inspiring action, guiding personal growth? What do you think?
Well, I'm thinking about how this excerpt compares Imagine to those core teachings of Jesus, like the golden rule, loving your neighbor.
Yeah.
And it strikes me that both Imagine and those teachings, they both sort of point us toward a similar place, right? A world without hunger, without greed, a world of peace.
Absolutely. When you hear those lyrics, imagine all the people living life in peace. It's hard not to think about the call for love and empathy that you see in so many religious and philosophical traditions.
So different messengers maybe, but maybe, just maybe, the same message at their core.
Right. Striving for something better, something more.
Okay, but here's where things get really interesting. The excerpt doesn't shy away from Lennon's, shall we say, complicated personal life.
Yeah.
The domestic violence, the contradictions with his message of peace. It's tough to reconcile those things.
It really forces you to confront that age-old question, right?
Yeah.
Can you, or even should you, separate the art from the artist?
Right. And it's a question that resonates beyond just John Lennon, don't you think? It makes you think about historical figures, leaders, even religious figures, and how we grapple with their flaws while still engaging with their messages.
It's that idea that nobody's perfect. No text is perfectly straightforward, and understanding any message means understanding the context, the contradictions, the whole picture.
Which actually reminds me that there's this other point about Imagine that the excerpt brings up Yoko Ono's role.
Oh, right.
She was deeply involved in creating it, but wasn't given credit initially.
Yeah, interesting.
It's like, whoa, another layer of complexity in how we understand authorship and how stories get told.
And it reminds me of all those debates about the authorship of different texts throughout history, right?
Yeah.
Who gets to tell the story? Who gets written out? And how does that shape how we understand not just history, but belief systems, even our own lives?
It's like finding out a new truth about an event from the past that you thought you already knew.
Fascinating. So we've gone from Imagine as this almost sacred song to this whole conversation about authorship, wisdom, and whether we can separate a message from the messenger.
And I think that's the point, right?
So tell me, after this deep dive, do we have an answer? Whose words are ultimately wiser, John or Jesus? I don't think it's about crowning a winner. I think the real wisdom is in wrestling with these questions, considering the nuances, embracing the complexity.
Yeah.
Both John and Jesus, flawed as they were, they offer profound reflections on what it means to be human, to grapple with injustice, to strive for something better. So, whose words resonate with you and why?
I like that. That's something to think about.
Oh, yeah.
Something to ponder.
Something to think about. Something to ponder. Thank you, NotebookLM. That was a very intriguing and entertaining 3 minutes, 39 seconds of content. Finally, someone is validating my views. It's so fascinating. What are some thoughts on this? First of all, just the whole like AI is going to replace humans angle, terrifying new emerging technology. That's a huge component to this. I should give credit. I first discovered this new technology based on the Filmcast, a great podcast that talks about movies. They tried the same experiment of like creating a little podcast based on some of David Chen's content. So that's how I found out about it. And I thought, hey, I used to have a podcast and I have like this written document, content for a podcast that was never produced. So this seems like the perfect thing to try it on. Yeah, it's so funny. It's so hilarious to imagine. What if I just start uploading new AI generated content to the old podcast feed? That would be a fun social experiment, just to see what the reaction to that was. It's interesting to see how they sort of mimic human interactions and sort of this informal podcast. Like you've got the female voice seems to be the one who's more informed, sort of like bringing it to the male voice, saying, hey, I've got this little article, this little excerpt that I want to run by you. And the guy is a little bit more of like the audience surrogate who's like hearing this for the first time, is like, oh yeah, interesting. Fascinating how they recognize sort of the cultural significance, sort of the scandalous nature of that. Like right off the bat, she's sort of recognizing the controversial nature of this. Like, of course you can't compare Jesus to John Lennon. Like, you know, she recognizes that culturally Jesus is held to a much higher standard, and how this is sort of a provocative type of argument. Though by the end, she goes so far as to say Jesus and John, you know, both flawed characters. That's a pretty hot take. I feel like a lot of people would take issue with you saying that Jesus is a flawed character. You know, I think basically everyone in existence is going to agree that John Lennon is a complicated and flawed and imperfect person. I don't think that many people would feel safe calling Jesus of Nazareth flawed or even complicated. Well, people would say he's complicated, yeah. They discussed this. I'm trying to remember if they added anything new to what I'd written. I feel like they were flirting with it a little bit when they said like this doesn't just go for Jesus and John Lennon, when they were talking about the art versus the artist angle of things. They said this also goes to other historical figures. That was a moment when my ears perked up and I thought, oh, are they gonna like add new elements to the conversation? Are they gonna bring up, I'm trying to think of an example, I don't know, like Roman Polanski or Picasso or something like that, like some other like well-known classic, like separate the art from the artist style figure. They didn't name any names, you know, they just stuck to the script, I suppose. And they created an intriguing, you know, back and forth conversation. 3 minutes, 39 seconds worth of content based on a short paragraph that you could read in probably 30 seconds or so. So they certainly expanded just conversationally on my very brief excerpt of written content. Fascinating piece of technology here, interesting conversation. It was so fun just as an experiment to see how this went, to see what everybody had to say, what my two virtual podcast guests, what their takes were on it. I kind of wish I could have jumped in on the conversation and chatted with them, because it's such a fascinating and explosive topic. You know, in terms of AI replacing our jobs kind of thing, I've been living in that anxiety for years at this point. As a digital illustrator, graphic designer, I feel like I'm screwed already. I've been screwed for years in terms of, you know, AI just being able to do what I do, but faster, cheaper, better. I've never been someone who's made a living by making content on the internet, even though part of me kind of wants to be that person. I could see how this would be completely terrifying to someone who is a professional YouTuber, podcaster, someone who produces content and actually makes their living that way. I could see how NotebookLM is an existential fear for that type of person. Lots to discuss here, lots of ideas. The Jesus versus John Lennon angle, and also the AI replacing all creative content output angle as well. Thank you for watching this lively discussion. Let me know what you think in the comments. All right, love you. Goodbye.